a concept called the Axial Age. Now, if you start taking a step back, if you look at the period between about 600 and 400 BC, there's a sudden outrush of new ideas in multiple sections of the world, in Greece, in Israel, in Iran, in India, in China. Many of these are still very much alive today. You have religions like Jainism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism that appear, Confucianism, Taoism, most forms of Greek philosophy, and Judaism as ethical monotheism all take shape right around the same period. Now, the question would be sort of what's happening? And one of the things that if you think about, if you compare what's happening around this time, is that we're beginning to see a lot more individuals. If you think back to, say, the Mesopotamian and Egyptian materials, you have things like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Who wrote it? Who knows? Once you begin talking about, Homer or Aeschylus or all of these other authors, Confucius and Lao Tse, Mahavira and Buddha, Zoroaster, Ezra, Jeremiah and Isaiah, Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, these major thought leaders who we can give names to. And that is something very different than what's been happening earlier. Be a question, well, why is this happening now? Why in these places? And it might be that, by this point, civilization in much of the world as urban literate societies been around for 2,000 years. And in some of these areas, we're looking at second generation civilizations. In India, Greece, and Canaan in particular, the first set of civilizations had disappeared and had given rise to completely new ones. Egypt is somewhat different, but even there'd been massive changes. Now, what that all leads up to is a whole set of ideas begin being articulated. Some of them are common across all of these different systems, like, for instance, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You can find this in many of the religious thought systems that are still operative around the world. And many of these either come into existence or are greatly changed right at this point. Jainism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism all begin right in this period. Hinduism and Judaism make major changes within themselves. And of course, those will both give rise to other religious movements down the road. There's a much greater emphasis on morality and ethical behavior than previously. Instead of the idea that you should obey these rules because they're the rules, you should sacrifice to the God because he's the God, you should do it because it's morally right. Not all of these involve gods, many of them don't. The ones that do start seeing the God that ruled the world, or the God, as wanting justice and order and being on the side of the downtrodden. And this is, again, definitely something new. Now, you may have noticed in those religions and philosophies one name that might sound unfamiliar, and that's Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a religious system, it's still in existence, that first appears in what are now Iran and Afghanistan during the 6th century BC. Before getting into exactly what it is, should say a little bit about the Persian society that is living in those areas at that time. Persian society from Indo-Iranian or Indo-Aryan tribes, just like the Aryans who invaded India. These are basically the Aryans who did not invade India. Within their society, as in India, there are castes. There are only 3 castes: warrior caste, a priestly caste, who are called magi, and a peasant caste. And the caste lines are not as rigid or as all-encompassing as they'll be in India. Religiously, they worship the sun, the moon, water, and the element of fire is very important. They have similar gods and rituals to the Aryans in India, and there is so much overlap that it's very obvious that they had been one people at some point in the past, more perhaps than between any of the other Indo-European groups. Now, into this setting comes a man named Zoroaster, or to give him his correct Persian name, Zarathustra. Zarathustra is from the priestly caste. He is wealthy and powerful. His life is a little bit obscure, but we know he wrote a series of hymns called the Gathas. His teachings would be transmitted orally by the priests who adopted his religion, that is the Magi, and only later come to be written down in a holy book that's called the Avesta. Now, from these, you begin to see a view of the world that is one of struggle, of constant conflict between good and evil. Good and evil are represented by 2 gods who are constantly fighting against each other: Ahura Mazda, the god of the good power, and Ahriman, the power of evil. We, as humans, must strive to help Ahura Mazda and make sure that Ahriman is defeated. If we do not, if we allow Ahriman to win within ourselves, we will be punished forever in eternal fire. To a very real extent, Zoroaster is the person who invents heaven and hell, or the first person to really push this idea, and that there is a judgment based on our deeds that decides whether we will go to heaven in the sky or to the fire beneath the earth. It will be borrowed in other religions. Now, his teachings will become the dominant religion among all the Persians. The priests of the religion that he creates will continue to be called magi. From magi, we get a number of words. Of course, you might remember the 3 magi in the Christmas story. But another way it's entered our language is the magi are supposed to be able to make spells and command the elements, that is, do magic. Zoroastrianism at one point was one of the major religions in the world. It has diminished to only a little bit over 120,000 people today, with the largest communities in Bombay in India and in the city of Yazd in Iran, plus a few communities elsewhere around the world. You may have heard of Freddie Mercury. He was a Zoroastrian. But besides that, Zoroastrianism does have some different practices than other religions. Fire is sacred. Their greatest shrines will be temples where there are fires. Within Iran, some of these will be at natural gas leaks so that there's a constant natural burning flame. Many of these fire temples, of course, are no longer in operation. Another practice that they have is sky burial. The dead are left in what are called towers of silence rather than being buried. Vultures and other carrion birds will come to the tops of these buildings where the dead bodies are laid out and clean their skeletons. The reason is that heaven is above. You want to go up spiritually into the sky. You do not want to be buried in the earth. Dead bodies are not to come into contact with the ground because, of course, that is where Ahriman lives. Ahura Mazda is in the sky. Ahriman is under the ground. Now, this religion will begin spreading across Iran and Afghanistan, where there are numerous peoples at this point speaking closely related Iranian languages. One of the groups that begins to adopt Zoroaster's teachings are a group of Iranian peoples called the Persians. They live in an area called Persis, which is in southern Iran, where they are dominated by another Iranian group, the Medes, who live to the north of them. Their ruler is a man named Cyrus, and Cyrus will lead a revolt to gain independence from the Medes. He gradually goes from being independent of the Medes to conquering the Medes and absorbing the Medes into this new Persian Achaemenid Empire. He conquers Babylon, he conquers Lydia, he conquers areas to the east. His son will conquer Egypt. Later rulers will add areas beyond, creating one of the greatest empires in world history. Now, when Cyrus captures Babylon, he liberates the people of Judah. He establishes at that point the idea that while he and many of the ruling people are Zoroastrian, you can practice any religion, worship any god inside their empire. That is on you. This is a very new thing in world history. He famously conquers the kingdom of Lydia. Lydia is where money had been invented slightly less than 100 years earlier, and it was probably the wealthiest kingdom at exactly this point because of their resources of gold and silver. After him, his son continues to expand, and with them, they are bringing Egypt, Mesopotamia, which no longer will be independent, other than occasionally going forward. He also conquers the Indus Valley. So 3 of the great river civilizations he absorbs into his empire: the Phoenicians, the various Canaanite and Philistine people, the people of Judah, people of Asia Minor. This is an empire that is massive. Its capitals, Persepolis and Susa, will be decorated with massive public buildings and palaces. And if you look at some of their art, you can see that this Persian Empire will be bringing together Mesopotamian art and Egyptian art. These are the same ruler depicted in the styles of Mesopotamia and Egypt, as well as other cultures that they absorb. In fact, the Achaemenid Persian Empire is so big that as percentage of the world's people, no empire since has had a greater portion of the people alive during their time living under their government. You can see here from one of the palaces all the different peoples coming to bring gifts to their emperor, the Shah of Shah, the King of Kings. Persians, Medes, Elamites, Parthians, Arians, Bactrians, Sogdians, Khwarezmians, Zarangians, Aracosians. Most of these are from Iran and Afghanistan so far. Gandharans, Hindus, for those who both be from the Indus Valley. Babylonians, Assyrians, Arabs, Egyptians, Armenians, Cappadocians, Lydians, Ionians, those are Greeks, Sakas from Central Asia, Scudrians, I have no idea, another Ionian Greek, and finally a Libyan. The empire is divided up into 23 provinces, each ruled by a satrap, so they're called satrapies. The individual governors, the satraps, have a great deal of independence. They have their own armies and tax collectors, and all of them receive additionally tribute from other peoples living even further beyond the empire. Cyrus creates organizations of imperial spies who are called the eyes and the ears of the king, who keep track of what's going on throughout the empire. He creates a military force of elite, full-time professional soldiers called the Immortals. And he creates the first long-distance postal service. They have, along the main highways, staging posts to carry messages from one part of the empire to the other. Of them, it is said that as many days as there are in the whole journey, so many are the men and horses that stand along the road, each horse and man at the interval of a day's journey. And these are stayed neither by snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness, from accomplishing their appointed course with all speed. It's from the Greek author Herodotus, and it is the official motto of the U.S. Postal Service. Now, one of the areas that Cyrus had brought into his empire is an area called Ionia. Ionia is the area in green on this map of Greek city-states along the western coast of what's now Turkey or Asia Minor. The Ionians, as well as the Aeolians and Dorians who lived along the Asia Minor coast, were brought into the Persian Empire in 547 because they had earlier come under the overlordship of Croesus, the king of Lydia. So once Croesus was defeated by Cyrus, his subjects become Cyrus's subjects. Now, at first, that doesn't mean much. They have to pay a small annual fee to their ruler in the city of Sardis, who is now a Persian satrap, rather than an independent king. It doesn't initially affect them very much. However, as time goes on, two conflicts two very different tendencies come into conflict. The Ionians, like other Greek cities, are transitioning towards much more democratic societies during the course of the 6th century. The Persians, however, prefer to have tyrants or strongmen running the various cities. It's a natural urge. It is much easier for the Persians to deal with one person in each of these cities rather than worry about a democratic government. So they install and strengthen tyrants, that is, dictators, in each of these cities. Because the Persians keep doing this sort of thing, they're not gaining friends among the Ionians. And in 499 BC, the Ionians rise up to drive out the Persians. The Ionians get a great deal of support from the city of Athens. The city of Athens speaks the same Ionian dialect as the people in the Ionian cities and feels a very strong sense of relationship with them. And of course, Athens too is in the process of becoming a democracy in these years. When the revolt is crushed in 493, the Persian emperor at the time, Darius, decides that he would not have had to worry about the revolt if it had not been for Athenian meddling in his business. And to secure his control over Ionia, what he needs to do is to punish Athens. The following year, Persians begin to enter Europe and begin to conquer areas in sort of to the north of Greece, in Thrace and Macedonia. Generally, they're simply asking local rulers to become their puppets. In 490, Darius sends a naval expedition carrying an army across the Aegean Sea to land on the coast, the northern coast of Attica, the region where Athens is, and capture the city. The Athenians, when this happens, are terrified. Here is the greatest army in the world, and they are not just professional soldiers, they're here and they're coming to Athens. So the Athenian militia is called out and goes to the village of Marathon. And there on the plain outside of Marathon, the Athenian army defeats the Persians. The Athenians are jubilant, they are shocked. The army in its victory sends a messenger, the fastest man in Athens, to run from the battlefield back to the city to take the great news. There is no longer a need to panic. Athens is secure, the Persians have been defeated. He runs the entire distance. When he arrives, he tells the good news to the Athenians and promptly dies. When the modern Olympic Games were first held, they organized a race to commemorate this feat. And the distance from the battlefield at Marathon to the Acropolis in Athens is 26.2 miles. So if anyone is in cross country or does long distance running, hopefully, if you're bringing good news, you won't drop dead at the end of the race. Now, the Athenians believe at this point they're in good luck. It's over. Darius dies and is replaced by a new emperor in Persia named Xerxes, or that's how we say it in English. His name, as said by a Greek, would be Xerxes, which is an approximation of a Persian name, which would have been Xerxes. Xerxes is a lot easier to say. Xerxes decides that he is going to be much better prepared to conquer Athens and bring the Greeks under Persian rule. He calls up possibly the largest army ever organized to this point, as well as his navy, which is made up of ships and sailors from the Phoenician territories, as well as some of the Greek cities that are already under his rule. And they advance up the coast of Asia Minor and then north around the northern shore of the Aegean, with the navy moving in parallel to the army. When they reach the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe and Asia, he is faced with the dilemma of how do you move a few 100,000 men across the sea? So what he does is he has his ships tied together, and then they create a road, so a pontoon bridge from Europe to Asia, and march across the sea. It won't be until, I believe, 1978 that another bridge will connect Europe and Asia. Anyway, they continue their advance through Thrace into northern Greece. As they are moving ahead, the Greeks, cities down in southern Greece, are very aware this is happening. They are terrified. The army is so massive, there is no way any single Greek city can stand up against them. Messages, embassies begin going between the various Greek cities, and the two leading cities form an alliance, inviting the other Greeks to join them. And these would be Athens and Sparta. Together, they think, with any Greeks who are willing to fight, they have a chance of stopping the Persians. The Athenians will be in charge of the naval aspect of the war, the Spartans in charge of the land warfare. To slow the advance of the Persians into southern Greece, the Spartans send an army north, 300 elite soldiers. There's a place called Thermopylae in northern Greece, where if you're coming from the north into the south, at this point there is only one road through by land, and it is right along the sea. Immediately on the side of the road, high mountains rise up. This pass will be the site of many battles throughout history, the most recent one during the Second World War. If you're trying to stop an invasion of Greece, this is the most strategic place. So the Spartans prepare fortifications in the narrowest part of the pass. They have 1,200 allies from the city of Thespis, the Thespians. And together they are facing probably somewhere between 100 and 200,000 Persian soldiers. They know they are going to lose. They know the best they can hope for is to slow the Persians down. As the battle goes on, the Greeks realize they're going to lose. The Spartan leader, King Leonidas, tells the Thespians to go home, so that they can live to fight another day. He and his men will stay, and all 300 of them die. They're still remembered if anyone has seen this movie. And it becomes a great myth of resistance. What they have done by fighting for as long as they've been is they've given the other Greeks time. And in particular, they have given the Athenians time. The Athenians abandoned their city and are able to evacuate the entire population of Athens to an island offshore. The Persians reach Athens. They burn the city to the ground. Xerxes places his throne atop the Acropolis, the high hill in the center of Athens, so he can enjoy watching the Athenian fleet be destroyed as the Persian fleet comes in to meet them and complete the victory. It doesn't work out the way he had planned. The Athenian navy wins a massive naval victory. They destroy hundreds of Persian ships. Xerxes, realizing the disaster that's happened, evacuates with as many soldiers as he can take by sea back to Asia. The Persian army that remains will be defeated the following year by a Spartan force at the Battle of Plataea. Greece is saved. The war is not over, even though for Sparta, the Spartans at this point, they're out of the war. The Athenians continue the war for 30 years. They form a naval alliance called the Delian League, made up of the Greeks, mostly on the islands, to create a large navy to drive the Persians back out of Europe, to liberate the Greek cities of Asia Minor, and they win. It takes 30 years of hard battle. During these, there's also a revolt in Egypt. The Athenians send soldiers, weapons, any kind of support they can give to the Egyptian revolt. And in the end, they win. The Greeks are freed from Persian rule. And Persia will never menace the Greeks seriously again. But victory brings its own problems. And I'll get to that in the next one of these.